really, really important, exciting research, and Morocco is at the forefront of this. And not just Morocco, but also Qatar. Stefano mentioned there's a planet called Qatar, and there are actually several ones. The first planet by the name of Qatar was discovered in 2010, Qatar 10b. Since then, we've had the discoveries of 6 or 7 further planets. Here you can see sculptures of 3 planets discovered in 2016, Qatar 3b, Qatar 4b, and Qatar 5b. These are all artists' impressions, but we don't really know for certain what these planets look like. How they were discovered were through the transit method, whereby you look at a star and you look at the light coming from that star, and essentially you're looking for dips in the light curve. So you're looking for periodic changes in the amount of light that's coming from that star. So here you can see the Qatar 4b signal. That's actually a moment when there's less light than usual coming from that star. And that could mean that an object, like a planet, is passing between the star and the observer. And that's a very, very common method on how you now have to, how we discover planets nowadays. And obviously, this takes a lot of computing power as well, because you have to make sure that you filter out all kinds of atmospheric, for instance, interferences and so on. So on both ends of the Arab world, Morocco as well as the Gulf, we can see exciting discoveries of planets. And I would like to understand how these discoveries, how this research is possible, how it is successful, how it comes into being, and so on. We do have a lot of literature on the history of Arabic and Islamic science, often written by Arabs themselves, in English as well as Arabic. We have accounts by professional scholars such as Jörg from Lebanon. He wrote a history of Arabic astronomy, planetary theories during the golden age of Islam. Or we have more popular accounts such as the Iraqi-born physicist Jim al-Khalili with his book Pathfinders, the Golden Age of Arabic Science. However, as these titles suggest, the focus of much scholarship and many popular accounts when it comes to Arabic and Islamic science is the so-called Golden Age, right? The period that we typically locate somewhere in the Middle Ages, somewhere between the 8th century and the 13th century. Unfortunately, the term Golden Age often implies that what comes after the Golden Age is some kind of stagnation, some kind of decline, right? The Golden Age ends at some point. Hence, these books don't talk much about the kind of science and the kind of discoveries that are happening in the Arab world today. And modern Arab astronomy, I should say, is also very different from the Golden Age scientific work, right? The Arabs of 9th century Baghdad or 13th century Damascus, they did not have telescopes, they did not have computers, they did not have rockets, and so on. So this kind of literature isn't very helpful for understanding modern Arab space science. There's other literature on space science in developing countries more broadly, such as James Clay Maltz's Asia's Space Race, National Motivations, Regional Rivalries and International Risks, or Robert C. Harding's book, Space Policy in Developing Countries, The Search for Security and Development on the Final Frontier. Unfortunately, those books usually focus more on China, India, and don't say much about the Arab world, and are often not based on Arabic sources either. But moreover, they look at space explorations through a specific lens of international relations and politics, right? But they argue that developing countries invest in space because, well, it makes them more secure or stronger or healthier or wealthier, and so on. However, this does not fully explain why Morocco or Qatar would invest in exoplanet research, right? How does the discovery of planets light years away, planets that we might never get to, how does this make Morocco any wealthier? How does this make Qatar any more secure? How does this lead to the development of the country? So we need to look further. It's important, obviously, to look at individuals. Right, we can't just look at sort of national priorities alone. We need to recognize the passions of scientists themselves, their individual dedication, their networking, and so on. And we can see, for instance, that the Qatar Exoplanet Survey, which led to the discovery of these planets named Qatar, was initially a private initiative by a Qatari astronomer named Khalid As-Subai'i. He had very little support from the Qatari government. He worked for Qatar Petroleum, the main oil company, and at some point he decided that he wanted to do a PhD in astronomy, which he entirely self-funded. He went to St Andrews in Scotland, did a PhD in astronomy, wanted to start astronomical research in Qatar, found little support, then took his own money, established his As-Subai'i establishment for scientific studies, engaged in networking with scientists across the world, such as David Latham here in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it was his own passion and so on that ultimately also convinced the Qatar National Research Fund to give him money. So individuals are important. That it means not just individual scientists, but also rulers, right? Why one country invests more in space than others also has to do with what the rulers are interested in, especially in many Arab countries where power is often very concentrated in very few people, right? Where the ruler would often have an enormous amount of power. So one of the reasons why Jordan perhaps invests relatively a lot of money in space and astronomy is perhaps also because King Abdullah is a Star Trek fan. He made a cameo appearance in the television series Star Trek Voyager already in the 1990s, and his development fund invested recently in a Red Sea Astrarium, a kind of holiday resort slash theme park, which also includes hello, is this working? Can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. However, on the other hand, we also see Arab rulers who are very disinterested in space. A good example is Muammar al-Qaddafi. He actually published a short story entitled Intihar Ra'id al-Fada, the suicide of the astronaut, in which basically an astronaut goes to the moon in order to find resources, finds nothing, comes back to Earth and tries to then find a job with his astronaut skills, with his astronaut knowledge, and then finds his skills and knowledge to be utterly useless in farming or in trades, and then ultimately is unemployed and kills himself. So Muammar al-Qaddafi did not see a future in space. He invested in other technological projects, such as a great man-made river, giant network of canals, but not in space. And that's perhaps one of the reasons why Libya, despite its gigantic oil wealth, never created much of a space program beyond like a missile program during the 1980s. I mentioned individuals, but the word state is in the title of this talk, and states play a huge important role, especially in any form of big science, any form of science that costs a lot of money, and that includes space science, right? Rockets, satellites, big observatories cost a lot of money. Very few individuals have that much money to privately finance this research. Very few companies would take the risk of developing rockets that might give you some profit decades later, but not immediately. So states are the biggest supporters of space exploration, and that includes states in the Arab world. States also make or contribute to making Arab astronomy modern. That what is distinct, for instance, for 19th, 20th, 21st century Arab observatories is that they have backing by a state behind them, right? Whereas in medieval times, an observatory would often not outlive an individual patron. If the ruler dies, the observatory would die or would not survive for more than perhaps 2 more generations. Once you have a state, then you have institutional continuity. Then even if the ruler changes, even if the regime changes, scientific institutions survive, right? You see that with universities, right? Even if one ruler comes and goes, the university would just continue. And the same goes for big scientific institutions such as observatories. And one example is the Khedivial Observatory in Helwan, which has roots in the 19th century but was founded in Helwan, south of Cairo, in the early 1900s as the Khedivial Observatory, named after the Khedivi, the viceroy of Egypt under the Ottoman Empire. Once Egypt was no longer part of the Ottoman Empire, the Khedivial Observatory became the Royal Observatory. Once Egypt was no longer a monarchy, it just became Helwan Observatory. And nowadays, the Helwan Observatory is called the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics. However, that close relationship and close dependence of observatories of science on the state also has disadvantages. Whenever the state gets attacked, scientific institutions also get attacked or tend to get attacked. And this was the fate of the Iraqi National Observatory, actually in a location very similar to the Akhawayn Observatory in Morocco, right? An excellent observing location, high mountains. This is in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, so dry mountains with lots of nights with clear skies. This was a state-of-the-art observatory that was being built in the 1980s, but then was in the war with Iran, attacked by Iranian forces, then in the war of 1990-1991 attacked again by American-led forces, and neither the Iranian nor the American-led forces cared very much about whether this dish here was a radio telescope, which it was, or whether it was a radar dish, and of course you can transform one into the other. However, what is special about the Arab world is also that we don't just have individual states, we have a strong regionalism, right? We have a strong regional identity. Just like in Europe there's the European Union, in the Arab world there has been the Arab League. Even before there was an Arab European Union, there was an Arab League. And there have been various efforts to set up Arab space agencies of various kinds, similar to the European Space Agency, which is a successful venture. So for instance, there's an Arab Union for Astronomy and Space Science with headquarters in Morocco. A union that organizes, for instance, an Arab conference on astronomy and space science, or an Islamic astronomical conference. In the logo of that conference, you can see the astrolabe, that iconic instrument of the golden age of Arabic and Islamic science. An object that is also revered as an artistic object. Here is an example from the Museum of Islamic Art in Doha. And there you can see that the Arabic Golden Age, even though it seems so distant, right? Even though the techniques of the Golden Age seem to have so little to do with modernist Arab astronomy, which relies so heavily on computers, telescopes, etc., the Golden Age still serves as an inspiration. And it also serves as an inspiration for science fiction, and also the dream of Arab unity is part of science fiction. Why is science fiction important? Well, because before people went to the moon, they imagined going to the moon in science fiction, right? Before we go to other stars, we will have long imagined going to other stars. So this is, for instance, a short story by an Egyptian science fiction writer named Raouf Wasfi, entitled Love in the 21st Century. The story itself is sort of from the 1990s. The story is about a saruh, a rocket called Al-Wahda, meaning unity, and it carries the first Arab spaceship, and it's named Ibn Majid, after historic explorer and geographer. It carries the first Arab satellite, and it also carries the first two Arab astronauts into space. Right, so here you can see a space Arabism, Arab unity in space being part of science fiction and motivating at least some scientists. However, there are also global elements, there are also cosmopolitan elements, but no state and no region can never do space exploration all by itself. But even the Americans, even the Soviets have relied on expertise coming from other countries, for instance, on German Nazi expertise after World War II to build their rocket programs. And Arab countries have long recognized that they need expertise from other countries to develop their space programs. And Abdelhamid Abdelghani, he was one of the first heads of the United Nations Organization for Outer Space Affairs. He, for instance, argued very, very early on that space was not just the domain of the more advanced superpowers, but that all nations have a stake in this activity of mankind in space exploration, and that this space exploration should also be peaceful. So amidst the rivalry, there is also this emphasis on peace. And the United Nations, in collaboration with the European Space Agency, has, for instance, helped develop space capacities in Arab countries, for instance, through a series of workshops on basic space science. And when one looks at the discovery of Qatar 1b, that first planet named after that Gulf country, one can see how this is really not just the effort of one Arab country, right? This is a collaboration between multiple countries, between multiple institutions. So at the same time as there is a nationalism, that there is national ideology, whether it's Arab nationalism or Qatari nationalism or Jordanian nationalism playing a role, these international connections are just as important to understanding modern Arab space science. I want to give a few more examples from the history of Arab space science, looking more closely at satellites. Arab countries have been very, very interested in satellites very early on. They promised, for instance, to connect often thinly populated large Arab countries with one another. So, for instance, if you look at Algeria, gigantic country, small population, it makes much more sense to connect Algerian community through satellites with one another than lay landlines all through the country. So Algeria, for instance, has been a very early member in the International Telecommunications Satellite Organization, Intelsat. And Arab countries already in the 1960s realized that an Arab satellite system would help connect Arab countries together
would also help avert common threats, as seen, for instance, by Israel, etc. And that is the origin of Arabsat, the Arab Satellite Communications Organization, which still exists, an organization that was founded in 1975 and that has shareholders from all over the Arab world. And in 1985, it launched its first Arab satellite, ArabSat-1A, into orbit. Obviously, these satellites are nowadays super important for instance, satellite television, right? And one can't underestimate the political importance of satellite channels such as Al Arabiya, such as Al Jazeera, NBC, and so many others. These satellites are not just about space technology, they're also about space science, and one of the missions, first Arabsat missions, was also a scientific mission, launching the second Arab satellite, Arabsat-1B, in 1985 from the American Space Shuttle Discovery was Sultan bin Salman Al Saud. He was on board that shuttle as part of a multinational crew with American colleagues as well as a French astronaut. It was the first space shuttle mission with people from 3 nationalities on board. And he engaged in multiple experiments, an crescent observation experiment, a remote sensing experiment where he would take photographs from space of Earth, especially of the Arabian Peninsula and of Arab Desert. And he also participated in a French-led medical experiment to understand the effects of zero gravity, or rather microgravity, on the human body in space. So we here have Islamic and regionally important experiments, as well as sort of experiments of a medical nature that are of importance to the whole of humanity. In 1986, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, grounding the American Space Shuttle fleet and preventing further Saudi missions to space. However, other Arab countries had very good relations with the other major space power of the Cold War, that is the Soviet Union, and one of the most important Arab countries in this regard is Syria, right? We can still see the relationship between Damascus and Moscow being super strong. And this relationship allowed, in 1887, a Syrian cosmonaut to become the second Arab to go into space, Muhammad Faris. I have a video here, but I would like to skip that for the sake of time. And he became a national hero, a hero of Syria, a hero for the Arab world. But at the same time, he also became a cosmopolitan. He visited the space station Mir, and he said about fellow astronauts much later in 2015, "We were like brothers. All the cosmonauts and astronauts know each other and are one big family." And about Mir, that space station, he said it was a home for all the astronauts and cosmonauts that visited it and lived on it, each leaving something behind, from books to sketches to photographs to flags to all sorts of symbolic items from their home countries. It was cluttered with memories. And this cosmopolitan view of the Earth as united, as humanity as united, was also shared by many astronauts, including also the Saudi astronaut. Here's again another quotation by Muhammad Faris, that Syrian astronaut, in 1988. He says, "From space I saw Earth indescribably beautiful with the scars of national boundaries gone." This formed part of a collection, a book entitled The Home Planet rather than The Home Country, book published for the Association of Space Explorers. Sultan bin Salman Al Saud, that first Arab astronaut, by the way, he's a son of the current Saudi King Salman. He also published a book by the title One Planet, the story of the first Arab mission to space. So he describes it as an Arab mission. He himself was also celebrated as a Saudi hero and an Arab hero and so on. But he makes a very similar quotation. So when he was on Space Shuttle Discovery, he said, the first day or so we all pointed to our countries. The third or fourth day we were pointing to our continents. And by the fifth day we were only aware of one Earth. And this has also been described as the overview effect. This sort of this nationalism coexisting with cosmopolitanism is something that stayed with these astronauts. So Mohammad Faris, by the way, he left Syria in 2012. He became a refugee. He abandoned the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad, and now he lives in Turkey. But he said, it would take me days to describe the feeling of going up there, seeing planet Earth, seeing Syria from above, and that sense of pride of accomplishing something historic for my country and for the Arabs. However, at the same time, he said in that interview, when you go up there, you realize there are no borders, no countries, no nationalities, just Earth, Mother Earth, Mother Earth. These two elements, I think they are sort of crucial for understanding Arab space science, this nationalism as well as this cosmopolitanism. You can't do space science effectively without taking knowledge from other nations, without collaborating with other nations. At the same time, if politicians need to justify spending billions of dirhams or riyals or dollars on space explorations, they often have to justify that in national terms, that it is somehow important for their respective nations, important for their wealth or security or prestige or whatever. And we can see this nationalism and cosmopolitanism also present in the recent space efforts of the United Arab Emirates, arguably the most ambitious Arab country in terms of space exploration currently. The UAE is obviously a country that tries to brand itself as the country of the future. Dubai in particular likes to see itself as the city of the future. Dubai in fact even has a museum of the future. And Dubai and also Abu Dhabi have attracted filmmakers to make science fiction movies based on Emirati landscapes and cities. So for instance, Star Trek films and Star Wars films have been filmed in the UAE. But there have also been local productions such as this film Ariel's about aliens coming to Earth by Dubai-based movie makers. And as part of this Emirati investment sort of in the future, in everything that has to do with the future, an ambitious space mission was announced in 2014, the Emirates Mars mission. This is a mission that sends an unmanned spacecraft, a satellite, to Mars, to orbit Mars and to study the Martian atmosphere in order to also better understand arid environments, arid climates, arid atmospheres, things that are obviously very important to the Arab world. This spacecraft is called Al-Amal, meaning hope in Arabic. It is supposed to it is supposed to be launched in 2020, so next year, coinciding with the Dubai World Expo, so another event that's supposed to showcase the futurity of the Emirati nation. The Emirates Mars mission is supposed to reach Mars in 2021, coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the United Arab Emirates as a nation. And the Emirati government made a point of sort of putting Emirati scientists and engineers rather than expats at the forefront of this mission. So you can see this mission is really seemingly all about nationalism, all about strengthening Emirati national capabilities, strengthening the scientific, technological base of the Emirates. But even there, one can still see this overview effect, right? Sada Amiri, she's a an Emirati scientist and engineer involved in the project. She says, "Space is very humbling, and an image of Earth without any boundaries makes you think more about putting our differences aside and treating each other as humans and one species." Well, let me conclude here. So, space exploration in the Arab world is not just a thing of the Middle Ages. It's not just something that happened 1,000 years ago. Arab countries from Morocco all the way to the UAE are very, very interested in all things space, from observatories to Mars missions. Partly this effort draws on the Golden Age. The Golden Age, or the idea of the Golden Age, serves as a resource, serves as an inspiration for these projects. But nonetheless, these projects are not just a renaissance of medieval Arabic science. So it's not just medieval Arabic science coming back, right? These are profoundly modern endeavors, not just modern in terms of technologies, in terms of computers, hardware, software, instruments, etc., but also about modern in terms of ideologies, the nation state, and so on, and its antithesis in some ways, right? That cosmopolitan view, so the view of a world without nations, a view of the world as united, a view of the world as exploring space together, as humanity stepping out of our planet together, stepping out of our solar system, perhaps, even together. So, and I think there are many more exciting developments that we can expect regarding space science in the Arab world. Amidst all the problems that the Arab world has, right, and often commentators in Arab science, they focus on, well, the lack of democracy, the lack of freedom of all kinds in different Arab countries. So amidst all the problems of the Arab world, I think the Arab world is part of this exciting future, and will be part of these exciting discoveries that we can expect, and maybe we will indeed discover more planets and maybe other civilizations out there in the cosmos. And if you're interested in finding out what that would mean for Islam, what that would mean for Muslims, right? If we discover people who are not the sons of Adam, then come to my lecture tomorrow, and thank you so much.